The letter said I had 5 days to remove my wheelchair ramp or face a $200 a day fine. My mother is 78 years old, she can't climb stairs anymore. And the woman who signed that letter. She'd once told me over coffee that her own father had died waiting for a home health aide because his building had no ramp. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it anyway. My name's Daniel Reyes. I'm 34, I fix HVAC systems for a living, and until 11 months ago my life looked pretty ordinary. I lived in a 3-bedroom colonial on Larkspur Court, inside a subdivision called Fairview Ridge Estates, the kind of place with matching mailboxes, seasonal flag rotations, and a homeowners association that took its landscaping bylaws more seriously than most people take their jobs. I'd bought the house 4 years earlier, mostly because the school district was good and the commute was short. I never once imagined I'd end up learning state disability law in my kitchen at midnight. My mother, Rosa, moved in with me last spring after her second fall. She'd broken her hip the first time, and the second fall cracked 2 ribs and put her in a hospital bed for 9 days. Her doctor was blunt. She needed to live somewhere without stairs, or somewhere those stairs had a workaround. My house had exactly 1 step up to the front door. 1 step. So I did what any son would do. I called a licensed contractor, pulled the correct permits from the county, and had a code-compliant wooden ramp built along the side entrance. It took 4 days. It cost just under $3,800. I still remember writing that check and feeling relieved, like I'd finally fixed the one thing that terrified me most: my mother alone on a staircase. The HOA board president was a woman named Karen Whitfield. She'd lived in Fairview Ridge for almost 15 years, drove a white Lexus with a proud HOA volunteer decal in the back window, and ran the community newsletter with the energy of someone auditioning for local government. I'd talked to her maybe a dozen times before that spring, always friendly, always about nothing. Sprinkler schedules, trash can placement, the usual. I had no reason to think she'd become the biggest obstacle standing between my mother and a safe home. That changed on a Tuesday in early June, 9 days after the ramp was finished. The letter arrived by certified mail, printed on the association's official letterhead. It cited Section 4.2 of the community's architectural guidelines, a clause about unapproved exterior modifications that alter the uniform aesthetic character of the neighborhood. It claimed my ramp violated the rule because it hadn't been submitted to the Architectural Review Committee before construction. It gave me 5 business days to remove it. After that, the fines would start, $200 a day, compounding weekly. I called the HOA office the next morning. I explained calmly that the ramp was a medical necessity for my mother, and that under the Fair Housing Act, reasonable modifications for a disabled resident are protected. HOAs don't get veto power over accessibility. The woman on the phone transferred me straight to Karen. I understand it's inconvenient, Karen said, in a tone that suggested she'd rehearsed the line, but rules are rules, Daniel. We can't have every homeowner deciding they don't need approval. Where does it end? She's 78 and she can't do stairs, I said. This isn't aesthetic, this is medical. Then submit a variance request, Karen said, through the proper channel like everyone else. I submitted it that same afternoon. Photos, a letter from my mother's physician confirming the medical necessity, the county permit, all of it. I thought that would end things. I was wrong. 3 weeks passed with no response. Then, on a Thursday in late June, I found a second letter taped to my front door, not mailed this time, hand-delivered, like they wanted me to feel it. The board had reviewed and denied my variance request. Their stated reason: the ramp's unfinished wood tone clashed with the community's approved color palette, and its placement created a visual obstruction from the street. Reading that line, standing on my own porch with my mother's walker parked 6 feet away, felt like being told a lie to my face by someone who knew I couldn't do anything about it. I painted the ramp within the week, a neutral gray that matched 3 other houses on the block at my own expense, another $420 I hadn't budgeted for. I photographed it, attached the receipt, and resubmitted. 2 weeks later, a new letter arrived, same result. Denied, new reason this time: the ramp's railing height did not conform to the community's approved fencing standards, even though it matched federal ADA guidelines to the exact inch. In between the 2 denials, Karen started stopping by in person, always just passing through, always right around the time my mother was outside getting fresh air. The first time she stood at the bottom of the driveway and asked, loud enough for the neighbor across the street to hear, whether I'd thought about a stair lift instead, something more discreet. I told her a stair lift costs upward of $9,000, isn't covered by my mother's insurance, and takes 6 to 8 weeks to install, none of which mattered to her because discreet was never really the goal. Invisible was the goal. She wanted my mother's disability tucked somewhere she wouldn't have to see it from her Lexus window. The second time, she left a sticky note on my mailbox instead of knocking. It read, "Neighbors have noticed. Please resolve soon, K." I still have that note in the folder. Handwriting, no date, no signature beyond an initial, as if she wanted the pressure without the paper trail. That's when I started keeping copies of everything, photographing every letter the moment it arrived, saving every email, timestamping every phone call in a notes app on my phone. I didn't know yet that I'd need it, I just had a feeling. That was the moment I understood this was never about color or railings or aesthetics. Every time I fixed the objection, a new one appeared. It was a moving target built to make me give up. And fines were already accruing. The board had started charging me $200 a day the moment my grace period expired, whether or not my variance request was technically pending. By the second week of July, the HOA had sent me an invoice for $4,200 in accumulated fines, with a warning that unpaid HOA fines in our state could eventually become a lien against my house. A lien on my house. Over a wheelchair ramp for my mother. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that night, invoice in one hand, my mother's physical therapy schedule in the other, and thinking, they are betting that I will fold before I fight. And for about a week, they were almost right. I called the HOA's management company, a third-party firm that handled billing for 4 different subdivisions, and asked to speak with someone above Karen. The woman who answered said, apologetically, that the board president has final authority over architectural disputes, and that fines are governed by the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which all homeowners agreed to at purchase. I asked her to pull up the specific clause that let a board override a documented medical accommodation. She went quiet for a second too long, then said she'd have someone call me back. Nobody ever did. That silence bothered me more than the fines themselves. It meant nobody at that management company actually wanted to look at the clause, because looking too closely might mean admitting Karen had never had the authority to deny my request in the first place. It also meant until I found somebody willing to look, the $200 meter kept running every single day, whether I paid attention to it or not. Then Karen made a mistake that changed everything. She brought it to the neighborhood in person. It happened at the July HOA meeting, held in the clubhouse behind the community pool, folding chairs arranged in uneven rows, roughly 30 homeowners in attendance. I went because the agenda listed architectural compliance update Larkspur Court. I wanted to hear, in front of witnesses, exactly what they intended to say about my mother's ramp. Karen stood at the front with a printed agenda and a laser pointer she didn't need. As many of you know, she began, we've had an ongoing compliance issue on Larkspur Court involving an unauthorized structure that's been negatively affecting curb appeal and, frankly, our property values. Property values. She said it like my mother's ramp was a junk car on blocks. I raised my hand, she didn't call on me, I stood anyway. With respect, I said, that unauthorized structure is a wheelchair ramp for my 78-year-old mother, and I have a doctor's letter confirming she needs it to safely enter her own home. A ripple went through the room, a few murmurs, someone's chair creaking as they turned to look at me. Karen's expression didn't crack. We're aware of your claim, she said, but the board has to apply the rules consistently or the whole system falls apart. If we make an exception for you, we have to make it for everyone. It's not an exception, I said. It's the law. Federal disability protections override HOA aesthetic rules. I've told you that in writing 3 times. That's your interpretation, Karen said. Our attorney disagrees. That line stuck with me the whole drive home. Our attorney disagrees. Not their attorney had reviewed it and concluded something specific, just a vague, confident claim thrown out to end the conversation. I decided that night I wasn't going to keep negotiating with people who treated my mother's mobility as a debate topic. I was going to find out, in writing, from someone whose opinion actually carried legal weight, whether Karen was telling the truth. The next morning, I called a fair housing attorney named Priya Anand, a name I'd found through the state's Fair Housing Council after 2 hours of searching the night before. I told her everything, the permit, the physician's letter, the repainted ramp, the moving objections, the $4,200 in fines, the lien threat, the clubhouse meeting. She was quiet for a moment, then said something I'll never forget. Daniel, what your HOA is doing isn't a gray area. It's a textbook Fair Housing Act violation, and the fines they've charged you are, in all likelihood, completely unenforceable. I want copies of every letter they've sent you, today if possible. I sent her the whole file that afternoon, 6 months of certified letters, emails, photos, receipts, and the physician's note, all of it time-stamped and organized in a folder I'd built almost by instinct, the way you save evidence when you sense deep down. That you're going to need it someday, Priya called back 2 days later. I've drafted a letter to the HOA's council, she said. I want you to understand what this means before I send it. Once this goes out, this stops being a conversation between neighbors. It becomes a legal matter with a paper trail, and HOAs that lose fair housing cases don't just pay damages, they pay the other side's attorney fees too. Are you ready for that? I thought about my mother upstairs at that moment using the ramp I'd built her, the ramp Karen wanted torn out over railing measurements that matched federal code to the inch. Send it, I said. The letter went out on a Monday. It cited the Fair Housing Act, the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, and a nearly identical case from another state where an HOA had been ordered to pay $18,000 in damages and attorney's fees for blocking a resident's ramp. It demanded the HOA void every fine, formally approve the ramp in writing, and issue a written policy update acknowledging that reasonable accommodations for disabled residents are not subject to aesthetic review. It gave them 10 business days to respond before Priya would file a formal complaint with the state's Fair Housing Agency and separately in federal court. For 4 days, nothing happened. I checked my mailbox every afternoon like it might change something, half expecting another letter demanding I remove a doormat next. My mother noticed I was tense and asked what was wrong. I told her it was nothing, work stress, because I didn't want her carrying the weight of a fight that existed entirely because of her ramp. On the 5th day my phone rang, it was Priya. Their attorney called me this morning, she said. Sit down for this one. I was already sitting, but I sat up straighter anyway. He didn't argue, Priya said. He didn't push back on a single point. He told me the board had ignored his advice from the very first letter you sent them. He'd apparently warned Karen and the board in writing back in June that denying a documented medical ramp request was legally indefensible. They didn't listen to him either. I actually laughed out loud alone in my kitchen. Karen hadn't just ignored me, she'd ignored her own attorney. So what happens now? I asked. They're capitulating, Priya said. Full retraction of every fine, that's over $4,000 gone. Formal written approval of the ramp, on record permanently. And they're required to send written notice to the entire HOA membership acknowledging the policy correction, so nobody else on Larkspur Court or anywhere in that community goes through what you just went through. It had taken the HOA's own attorney less than a week to end a fight the board had spent nearly 2 months manufacturing. The written retraction arrived 4 days later, on HOA letterhead, signed by the board treasurer instead of Karen. It stated in careful legal language that the association acknowledges its prior determination was issued in error, and that all outstanding fines related to the Larkspur Court accessibility modification were permanently rescinded, effective immediately. Attached was the formal dated approval of the ramp, the exact document I'd been requesting since June, the one they'd told me 3 separate times I didn't qualify for. I found out later from a neighbor who sat on the board's finance committee that Karen hadn't shown up to the meeting where the retraction was approved. 2 other board members voted it through without her. Reportedly frustrated that her handling of the situation had put the entire association at legal and financial risk. The treasurer in particular had apparently pointed out in the meeting that a losing fair housing case could have cost the HOA's insurance policy its renewal entirely. On top of the damages, one bad decision made out of stubbornness had nearly put every homeowner's dues at risk, not just mine. A different neighbor, a retired schoolteacher 2 doors down named Grace, told me she'd wanted to speak up back at that July clubhouse meeting but hadn't. Because Karen had a reputation for making things difficult for anyone who crossed her, extra scrutiny on their mailbox, paint their trash bin placement, their holiday lights left up 2 days too long. Hearing that helped explain the silence in that room the night I stood up alone. It wasn't that nobody agreed with me. It was that everyone had already learned the hard way what disagreeing with Karen tended to cost them. She resigned as president 6 weeks later, quietly, no announcement, no farewell paragraph in the newsletter she used to run with so much enthusiasm. The next newsletter, printed by someone else, included a brief note reminding all homeowners that accessibility modifications for medical necessity are protected under federal law and are not subject to Architectural Review Committee approval. No names. Everyone on that street knew exactly whose situation had forced the sentence into existence. My mother still uses that ramp every single day. Gray paint, code-compliant railing, exactly where it's always been. Some mornings I watch her come down it to get the mail, slow and steady, holding the rail with one hand, and I think about how close I came to just painting it a different color and hoping the next objection wouldn't come. It always would have come. That's what people like Karen count on, that you'll get tired before they run out of reasons to say no. I paid Priya's firm for 11 hours of work over the course of the whole dispute. Because the case settled through a formal legal demand rather than a courtroom filing, I never got a check for damages. But I never had to write one either. $4,200 in fines gone. A ramp my mother needed to leave her own house safely, finally in writing, permanently protected. Some wins don't look like a jackpot. They look like an invoice that says zero and a mother who can still get her own mail. The last time Karen and I spoke, it wasn't about the ramp at all. It was late September and I passed her at the mailbox cluster near the clubhouse. She nodded, said nothing, and got back in the white Lexus. I didn't say anything either. There wasn't anything left to say. The letter had already said it for both of us. If you take one thing from this, let it be this: know your rights before you ever have to use them. Keep every letter, keep every receipt, keep every date. The people who count on you not knowing the law are usually the first ones to fold once you do. If this story made you as angry and then as satisfied as it made me living it, hit subscribe, because there are a lot more stories like this one coming, and I promise every single one ends the same way this did.